So CUDA gives us some special qualifiers for indicating GPU-related functions or variables, and most of the ones you're meant to use have two underscores at the start and end of the name, but some of them are actually themselves macro definitions of other things. So let's start with a few location qualifiers, and these help tell CUDA where the code is actually going to run. And the first one, and the one that you've already seen, is global. And this is used to turn a function into a kernel, so something that runs on the GPU but gets invoked from the CPU. Kernels are executed with those triple angle bracket arguments. And the arguments are of type dim3, which we're going to talk about later, but there are shortcuts to creating this type. Next, there is device. Now, this is intended for functions that run on the GPU and get called from the GPU as well. And as you can imagine, you cannot call this from the CPU. Curiously enough, device can also be used for variables, and this is a very special case that requires a slightly different syntax for copying data to and from the device variable. And finally, there is host, which means the function is called by the CPU and runs on the CPU as well. And I guess there isn't much point for this except that qualifiers can actually be mixed. So you can have a function declared as host device, for example, and this function would be compiled for both the CPU via the host compiler and for the GPU via the CUDA compiler. So these things are typically useful for testing or just situations where you want to avoid code duplication.